What lengths would you go to for love in the 14th century? What truly unsettling rituals were performed under the cloak of night, all in the desperate hope of securing affection? From the hushed whispers of forgotten grimoires to the chilling testimonies recorded in church courts, the medieval era was rife with desperate measures, and some of the most unsettling involved love charms that stretched the boundaries of belief and common decency. Number 1. The grave dust and bone charm. Chilling practice of incorporating elements from the deceased into love charms was not a fringe curiosity in the medieval period. It was a deeply ingrained, albeit forbidden, segment of sympathetic magic. The underlying belief was that the dead, having transitioned beyond the realm of the living, possessed a unique and potent energy, a lingering essence that could be harnessed for various purposes, including compelling love. This was not about invoking ghosts or spirits in the manner of necromancy for conversation, but rather about borrowing the inert power of what remained. It was a tangible connection to the ultimate transformation, a finality that somehow imbued objects with a compelling, unyielding force. One of the most frequently discussed and certainly among the most disturbing variants of this charm involved the acquisition of grave dust. This was not just any dirt. It was earth specifically taken from a fresh grave, often from the grave of someone who had recently died tragically or violently, as their passing was believed to be more potent, more imbued with unspent life force or lingering passion. The ritual for collecting this ingredient was usually performed under the shroud of darkness, typically on a moonless night or during the waning crescent, to ensure secrecy and to align with the somber energies associated with death. Practitioner might approach the chosen grave with a small, unadorned shovel, often made of wood or bone rather than metal, to avoid any interference from mundane elements. They would silently scoop a small amount of earth from directly above the deceased's heart, believing this spot held the most concentrated power. This dust was then carefully transferred into a small, consecrated pouch made of dark linen or silk, often embroidered with symbols of binding or love, though subtly enough to avoid detection if discovered. Once collected, the grave dust had several applications. One common method involved sprinkling it subtly into the food or drink of the intended beloved. The idea was that by ingesting a part of the powerful stillness of death, the target's will would be similarly stilled and bound to the practitioner, their affections fixed and unmoving like the earth itself. A historical account, though perhaps apocryphal, recorded in a 15th century collection of magical remedies known as the Liber Amoris Mortui, describes a young woman from Provence who, desperate for the attention of a wealthy merchant, allegedly baked grave dust into a spiced bread. The merchant, it was said, became utterly smitten, abandoning his previous affections. Though the story does not elaborate on the charm's ultimate duration or any unforeseen consequences, which were often feared, the ingestion aspect of this charm made it particularly unsettling, as the victim would unknowingly consume remnants of the grave, a stark violation of their person. Beyond mere dust, more ambitious and arguably more unsettling charms called for actual human bone fragments. Small bones, such as phalanges, finger bones, teeth, or even slivers of rib from a recently deceased individual, were highly prized. Procurement of these items was even more clandestine and dangerous than grave dust collection, requiring grave robbery, or in some horrifying instances, the desecration of fresh corpses, practices vehemently condemned by both church and secular law. The belief was that the bones, being the most enduring parts of the human body, held the most steadfast and unbreakable power. A bone, once incorporated into a charm, would bind the target with an unbreakable, almost skeletal grip. 13th century treatise on popular superstitions, the Speculum Mendaci, described a charm where a practitioner would grind a small fragment of a skull bone into a fine powder, mix it with pulverized herbs like vervain or periwinkle, and then sprinkle it over the threshold of the beloved's home. The notion was that each step the target took or each moment they wore the charmed garment would draw them closer, binding their very movements and desires to the practitioner. A variation of the bone charm involved not ingestion or direct contact, but sympathetic magic. A specific small bone, perhaps a rib or a metacarpal, would be taken from a grave and polished until smooth. Practitioner would then carve the initials of both themselves and the desired beloved into the bone, sometimes entwining them with a heart symbol or a bind rune representing eternal love. This bone would then be carried constantly by the practitioner, ideally in a small pouch against their skin or placed beneath their pillow at night. Constant proximity and the inscribed names were believed to create an unbreakable magical link, a bond that would grow stronger with every passing day, mirroring the unyielding nature of the bone itself. A record from the Episcopal Court of Chartres in 1421 mentions a legal dispute involving a young squire accused of using a bone of the departed to ensnare a noblewoman, though the details of the bone's origin and the specific ritual remain vague in the surviving transcript, likely due to the sensitive and scandalous nature of the accusation. The perceived power of these corpse charms was often linked to the specific circumstances of the deceased. A bone from a hanged man, for example, was thought to carry the raw, untamed energy of a life abruptly cut short, making it exceptionally potent for compelling sudden and overwhelming love. Bones or dust from a child's grave, conversely, were sometimes used to inspire a purer, more innocent, and fiercely protective form of affection, drawing on the perceived untainted essence of youth. The use of such items was not without profound risk. Apart from the obvious legal ramifications of grave desecration, there was a widespread belief that disturbing the dead could invite malicious spirits, curses, or misfortune upon the practitioner. Folk wisdom warned of the revenge of the earth, where the disturbed grave might cause barrenness, illness, or even death to those who violated its sanctity. The fear of divine retribution was equally potent, as these actions were seen as a direct affront to God's dominion over life and death, an attempt to usurp sacred power for selfish gain. Despite these grave warnings and the inherent creepiness of their ingredients, grave dust and bone charms persisted throughout the medieval period, particularly in rural areas where ancient magical praxis intertwined. They represented a desperate yearning for control over the uncontrollable force of human affection, a belief that even death itself could be bent to the will of a yearning heart. The darkness of the grave, the silence of the earth, and the enduring nature of bone were all pressed into service, creating a category of love charm that remains profoundly unsettling to the modern sensibility, a stark reminder of the often extreme measures taken in the name of love, or what was perceived as love, in a world steeped in both faith and fear. Number 2. The effigy of binding. Creation and manipulation of effigies for magical purposes, particularly in the realm of love and desire, was a deeply unsettling practice in the medieval era. It drew upon the principles of sympathetic magic, the belief that like affects like, and that an action performed upon an image or representation of a person would directly influence that person. This was not a simple child's doll. These effigies were meticulously crafted to serve as conduits, physical anchors for magical intent, designed to bind the will and affection of an unwitting target. The creepiness stemmed from the direct, often intrusive violation of a person's likeness and the manipulative intent behind every pin and every binding cord. Construction of these effigies was a critical first step, often performed with intense focus and specific ritualistic elements. The most common material was beeswax, prized for its malleability and its association with natural living energy. Some practitioners would combine the beeswax with other, more personal elements from the intended victim. This could include strands of hair, nail clippings, small pieces of discarded clothing, or even dust scraped from the floor where the target had walked. The more personal the connection to the target, the stronger the effigy was believed to be. If direct access to such items was impossible, practitioners might resort to using specific herbs associated with the person's zodiac sign or birth month, or even a small amount of dirt from their footprint, all meticulously kneaded into the wax. The effigy itself was usually a crude human-like figure devoid of intricate detail, but clearly gendered and sometimes bearing a facial likeness if the practitioner was skilled or dedicated enough. It was often given the name of the target, spoken aloud during its creation, to forge the magical link. A 15th century manuscript from a Parisian sorcerer, known as the Ars Amatoria Obscura, describes the meticulous process of shaping the wax, often with hands unwashed and specifically consecrated for the task, under the light of a single flickering candle made of beeswax, to further enhance the connection. Once the effigy was formed and imbued with the target's essence, the binding rituals began. These varied widely, but often involved piercing the effigy with thorns, needles, or pins, each thrust laden with specific intent. If the goal was to inspire passionate love, a pin might be driven into the effigy's chest, directly over the heart region. The belief was that the pain inflicted on the wax figure would translate into a burning, irresistible ache of longing in the target's own heart. If the desire was more carnal, pins might be driven into the effigy's groin or reproductive organs intended to inflame lust and sexual desire. Sometimes, multiple pins were used, each representing a specific aspect of the target's will or affection to be manipulated. For example, one pin for the heart, another for the eyes, to see only the practitioner, and a third for the tongue, to speak words of love. The act of piercing was often accompanied by specific incantations, whispered repeatedly, invoking spirits or forces to compel the target's affections. These incantations rarely survived in written form due to their secretive nature, but oral tradition suggests they were repetitive, rhyming phrases designed to cement the magical command. Beyond piercing, other methods of manipulation were employed. The effigy might be tightly bound with cords or ribbons, particularly those made of red or black thread, symbolizing passion or restriction. These bindings were intended to metaphorically tie the target to the practitioner, preventing them from forming affections for anyone else. The effigy might be buried near the target's home, particularly under the doorstep, so that every time the target entered or left, they would unknowingly step over the magical binding, reinforcing its power. Alternatively, it might be hidden in a specific, secret location known only to the practitioner, guarded like a precious secret. Its safety linked to the success of the charm. A peculiar account found in the records of a 1380 ecclesiastical trial in England mentions a woman who allegedly hid an effigy of her estranged husband inside a hollow tree near his hunting grounds, claiming it was meant to draw his mind back to her after he had taken a mistress. The outcome of the trial is not fully recorded, but the belief in the effigy's power was clearly strong enough to warrant legal action. The timing and circumstances of these rituals were crucial. Often they were performed at specific astrological alignments during certain moon phases, waxing for drawing in, full for peak power, or on particular days of the week associated with Venus, the planet of love. Practitioner would often isolate themselves, sometimes fasting or performing purifying rituals beforehand to ensure their magical intent was pure and focused. The entire process was one of intense concentration and singular will, as any doubt or distraction was believed to weaken the charm's efficacy. The risks associated with effigy magic were considerable, both in the eyes of medieval society and in the beliefs of the practitioners themselves. From a societal standpoint, effigy magic was often considered a form of witchcraft or malicious sorcery, punishable by severe penalties, including fines, imprisonment, or even execution. It was seen as a direct attack on a person's free will and was often linked to harmful curses and death spells, even if the intent was ostensibly love. For the practitioner, there was the constant fear of the charm backfiring. If the effigy was damaged or lost, or if the ritual was performed incorrectly, it was believed that the adverse effects could rebound upon the practitioner, leading to their own unwanted affections, illness, or misfortune. Common folk belief, widely recounted in collections of cautionary tales, warned that if an effigy meant for love was dropped or broken, the practitioner would become consumed by an unrequited, obsessive love for the target, a cruel twist of fate that mirrored the initial intent. Despite the inherent dangers and the undeniable creepiness of manipulating a human-like doll to control another's affections, the effigy of binding remained a persistent element in medieval magical practices. It offered a tangible, actionable method for those desperate enough to secure love, a direct physical manifestation of their longing and their desire for control. It reflected a worldview where the boundaries between the physical and the spiritual were permeable, and where personal representation held a profound and unsettling power, capable of bending the will of even the most resistant heart. Number 3. The consumption of bodily secretions. Among the most viscerally unsettling love charms of the medieval period were those that involved the ingestion, often unwitting, of another person's bodily secretions. This practice was rooted in the ancient belief in contagion magic, the idea that contact with a person's essence, particularly their bodily fluids, could transfer their characteristics, their soul, or even their will. To make someone consume a part of you was to literally incorporate your essence into their being, binding them from the inside out. The sheer invasiveness and the biological nature of these charms make them profoundly creepy, pushing the boundaries of personal space and hygiene in ways that revolt modern sensibilities. One of the most infamous and feared ingredients in these potions was menstrual blood. Throughout the medieval era, menstrual blood was viewed with a mixture of reverence, superstition, and fear. It was considered powerful, a potent symbol of feminine fertility and life-giving force, but also often associated with impurity and dangerous magic. For a love charm, a few drops of menstrual blood were surreptitiously added to the target's food or drink. The logic was that by consuming this essence of the practitioner's femininity and life, the target would become inextricably linked, their desires and affections bound to the source of the blood. Preparation was usually clandestine, often involving a single drop mixed into a strong flavored wine, a rich stew, or a sweet pastry to mask its presence. Peculiar reference in the Book of Secrets of Master Albertus Magnus, a popular collection of natural and magical lore circulated throughout the medieval period, mentions the use of blood of the monthly flux to bind a man's heart, advising its subtle addition to his favored drink at dawn. The very thought of unknowingly ingesting another person's bodily fluid is unsettling enough, but the specific nature of menstrual blood added layers of taboo and mystical potency. Beyond menstrual blood, other, equally repugnant secretions found their way into these desperate concoctions. Sweat, particularly sweat collected from the practitioner's armpit or groin, was sometimes used. The belief was that the sweat carried the very heat and essence of the body, and by introducing it into the beloved's system, it would inflame their passions and desires for the practitioner. This would often involve collecting sweat on a small piece of cloth, which would then be squeezed into a drink or even subtly wiped onto food. Similarly, nail clippings and strands of hair rich with a person's physical essence were ground into fine powders and mixed into food or drink. The idea was that these permanent, discarded parts of the body, once consumed, would form an internal, unyielding link, a part of the practitioner literally growing within the target, ensuring their loyalty. A judicial record from Venice in 1378 details the accusation against a servant woman who was said to have ground her own nail clippings into her master's morning porridge, hoping to secure his affections and elevate her standing. The accusation, whether true or not, highlights the real-world belief in such practices. Yearning was another disturbing ingredient, believed to carry a person's vital essence and thus capable of creating a strong sympathetic bond. While less commonly ingested directly due to its taste and smell, it was sometimes used in external applications, such as anointing objects that the target would touch, or even being sprinkled on the target's path. However, accounts of its internal use, often mixed with other strong flavors or fermented, do exist in scattered folklore. Saliva, though less repulsive than other fluids, also played a role. Kiss was often believed to exchange vital essences, but for more potent charms, a practitioner might subtly spit into a drink or onto a piece of food intended for the beloved. The direct, intimate exchange of saliva was thought to bind souls. The methods of delivery for these charms were always surreptitious. Practitioner would act with utmost secrecy, often during meals or social gatherings where their presence was expected and suspicion minimal. The goal was to ensure the beloved consumed the charm unknowingly, thereby circumventing their free will and any resistance. Practitioner might even use specific incantations whispered under their breath, while preparing or serving the charmed item, invoking forces to empower the concoction and ensure its desired effect. These charms were often paired with other ingredients, like herbs known for their aphrodisiac properties, such as mandrake, vervain, or periwinkle, or sweetening agents to mask the taste of the more unsavory components. The risks associated with these charms were manifold. From a practical standpoint, the ingestion of unhygienic substances could lead to serious illness or poisoning, a very real danger in a time before modern medicine. From a social and legal perspective, discovery of such a charm was catastrophic. It was considered a gross violation of personal autonomy, a form of spiritual poisoning, and often interpreted as witchcraft, punishable by severe societal ostracization, public shaming, or even legal prosecution leading to imprisonment or worse. Church vehemently condemned such practices as diabolical, believing they invited demonic influence and corrupted the soul. For the practitioner, there was the constant fear of the charm backfiring, of becoming obsessed with the target in a debilitating way, or of suffering unexpected physical ailments mirroring the charm's effect on the victim. Cautionary tale from a 13th century German collection warned of a woman who, having given her blood to a man, became consumed with an unquenchable thirst for his affection, losing her own mind in the process. Despite these grim realities and the truly stomach-churning nature of their ingredients, charms involving the consumption of bodily secretions represented a desperate, intimate attempt to forge an unbreakable bond. They epitomized the medieval belief in the potent, almost sacred power of the human body and its fluids, and the willingness of individuals to cross profound boundaries of decency and safety in pursuit of love, or at least the semblance of it, a truly disturbing testament to the lengths of human desire. Number 4. The animal entrails and sacrifices. In the medieval world, the boundaries between the human, the natural, and the supernatural were far more fluid than they are today. Animals were not merely beasts of burden or sources of food. They were seen as embodying specific qualities, spiritual energies, and often as conduits for magical forces. This worldview gave rise to a particularly gruesome category of love charms, those involving the entrails, organs, and often the sacrifice of animals. Creepiness here lies not just in the cruelty to living creatures, but in the belief that their suffering and their very essence could be magically extracted and bent to human will to compel love. It was a raw, primal form of sympathetic magic, steeped in the shedding of blood and the dissection of life. One common and disturbing charm involved the heart of a bat. Bats, nocturnal creatures often associated with darkness, shadows, and sometimes the underworld, were believed to possess a potent, albeit eerie, power. For a love charm, a live bat would be captured, often after considerable effort, and its heart removed while it was still beating. The raw, still pulsating heart was then either dried and powdered to be mixed into a drink for the beloved, or more often, it was sewn into a small pouch along with other ingredients, like vervain, rose petals, or strands of the practitioner's hair. This pouch would then be worn constantly by the practitioner, ideally against their skin or secretly placed under the pillow or mattress of the desired individual. The belief was that the bat's heart, being the center of its life force and associated with the mystery of the night, would compel the target's heart to beat only for the practitioner, drawing them magnetically and irresistibly. A late 12th century grimoire, the Grimorium Sanguinis, describes the bat heart charm as most efficacious for swift desire, emphasizing the need for the heart to be fresh from the creature still warm. Another unsettling practice involved the use of frogs or toads. These amphibians, often linked to stagnant water, decay, and transformation, held a complex place in medieval folklore. For a love charm, a live frog or toad might be impaled or buried alive in a specific location. One variant involves burying a frog under the threshold of the beloved's home, with the belief that its lingering life force and eventual decay would spiritually anchor the beloved to the dwelling and, by extension, to the practitioner who performed the ritual. A more direct and undeniably gruesome method involved boiling a black hen or a black frog until its flesh dissolved, leaving only the bones. The practitioner would then search through the bones until they found one that, when placed in water, floated against the current, or one that, when touched, caused a specific sensation. This specific bone was believed to be magically charged and was then carried as a potent love charm. The act of boiling a living creature for its skeletal remains, particularly a black animal which often symbolized hidden power, was seen as a powerful act of magical appropriation. Accounts from the Sloane manuscripts in the British Library, though sometimes later compilations, mention various practices involving the bone of the toad as a powerful love-drawing amulet, albeit often with caveats about its dark origins. Beyond specific animals, general animal sacrifice played a role, though often more subtly than explicit large-scale rituals. Blood from freshly killed does, known for their association with love and purity, was sometimes used. The blood would be collected and then either sprinkled on clothing, mixed into ointments, or even in more extreme cases, mixed into food. The symbolic sacrifice of a creature of purity was believed to transfer that purity and love-drawing essence to the charm. Similarly, elements from common household animals were used. Tongue of the dog, believed to represent loyalty and devotion, might be dried and powdered, then mixed into a charm to inspire unwavering fidelity. The eyes of a specific bird, representing keen sight and unwavering focus, might be incorporated into a spell meant to make the target see only the practitioner. The selection of the animal often corresponded to the desired outcome or the magical properties attributed to the creature. A snakeskin shed, and therefore representing renewal, might be used to renew a faltering affection. The liver of a pigeon, known for its swift flight, might be used to make a distant beloved hasten their return. The ritualistic nature of these charms was paramount. They were often performed at crossroads at midnight or under specific celestial alignments to maximize their efficacy. The practitioner might use specific knives or tools, often consecrated or made of specific materials, to perform the acts of killing or dissection. Incantations would be whispered, invoking elemental spirits or pagan deities to empower the animal's essence for the intended purpose. The risks associated with animal charms were significant. From a legal standpoint, animal cruelty, particularly involving practices that smacked of sorcery, could lead to accusations of witchcraft. Ecclesiastical courts often prosecuted individuals for such practices, viewing them as devilish and an affront to God's creation. For the practitioner, there was the inherent danger of attracting unwanted or malicious spirits, as the act of taking a life, especially ritually, was believed to open pathways to other realms. Folkloric warnings abounded about the curse of the animal, where the creature's spirit might haunt the practitioner, or the charm itself might backfire, leading to illness, misfortune, or even a twisted, unwanted obsession. An anecdote widely circulated in the German lands told of a peasant woman who, after burying a live black cat to secure her lover's fidelity, found herself tormented by nightmares and the constant presence of feline specters. Despite the inherent barbarity and the considerable risks, these animal-based love charms persisted. They offered a potent, tangible way to tap into the wild, untamed forces of nature, believing that by sacrificing or incorporating the essence of a living creature, they could harness its power to compel the most elusive of human emotions, love. It was a dark reflection of medieval man's relationship with the natural world, a desperate reaching for control over the heart, no matter the cost to another life. Number 5. The Lover's Compelling Potion. Among the most insidious and genuinely frightening medieval love charms were those involving compelling potions, mixtures designed to be ingested by the unwitting target, thereby binding their affections through internal means. Unlike charms that relied on sympathetic magic through objects or effigies, these potions aimed for a direct chemical, or rather alchemical, assault on the beloved's will and body. Creepiness stemmed from the extreme and often repulsive ingredients used, the secret administration, and the profound violation of the target's physical autonomy, as they would unknowingly consume vile substances designed to manipulate their deepest emotions. These were not harmless concoctions. They were often dangerous, sometimes even lethal, and always deeply disturbing. Prime example of a truly vile ingredient in these potions was the blood of a black hen, or sometimes a white pigeon. Color was often symbolic: black for hidden power, white for purity or intense focus. The blood, freshly drawn from the living bird, was then mixed into a drink or food. The medieval belief was that blood, being the essence of life and passion, would transfer these qualities to the target. However, the use of animal blood was often accompanied by more personal and far more repulsive additions. Consider essence of the practitioner, which might involve various human secretions beyond the menstrual blood and sweat mentioned earlier. Some recipes called for secretions from more intimate parts of the body, often collected from a practitioner's unwashed body, or even in the most extreme cases, ground up particles of their skin or nails. Aim was to literally make the target consume a part of the practitioner, creating an unbreakable internal bond. A French treatise from the early 14th century, The Secrets of the Enamored Heart, details a potion recipe that includes 3 drops of the lover's own vital fluid, taken from the armpit, mixed with sweet wine and honey for palatability. The very thought of such an ingredient, surreptitiously introduced, is profoundly unsettling. Another disturbing category of ingredients involved the use of human remains, albeit often in powdered form to mask their origin. While grave dust and bone fragments were used in other charms, their inclusion in ingestible potions made them particularly horrifying. For instance, tiny amounts of powdered human bone, sometimes from criminals executed by hanging, were believed to carry an intense binding power. The idea was that the bone, having defied decay for a time, would instill an unyielding fidelity in the beloved. Similarly, some extreme practitioners were said to have sought out dried human skin or hair from a corpse, grinding it into a fine powder to be mixed into a potion. These ingredients were incredibly difficult to procure and carried immense legal and social risks, but their supposed potency was believed to justify the dangers. A grim anecdote from an Italian legal manuscript from 1390 mentions a court case involving a woman accused of poisoning her husband with a potion of bone meal and blood, though the exact nature of the bone was not specified beyond taken from a place of public suffering. Beyond human and animal parts, the potions often included plants with strong magical or folkloric associations, some of which were genuinely toxic. Mandrake root, for instance, was highly prized for its alleged aphrodisiac and hypnotic properties, but it is also a highly poisonous plant. Its bizarre human-like shape further added to its mystique and perceived power. Other plants like vervain, periwinkle, and specific types of orchids were also used, though their efficacy was purely folkloric. Insects and reptiles also found their way into these concoctions. Ground-up beetles, particularly dung beetles or specific types of black beetles, were believed to carry a binding, compelling force. Worms, especially those found in graveyards, were sometimes used, linking the potion to the judging power of death and decay. The sheer variety of these ingredients, often combined in seemingly arbitrary but symbolically potent ways, speaks to a desperate search for effectiveness. Preparation of these potions was a clandestine and often ritualistic affair. Ingredients might be gathered under specific moon phases, at crossroads, or in remote, hidden locations. They would be pounded in a mortar and pestle made of specific materials, often bone or unvarnished wood, and mixed with liquids like wine, ale, or even the practitioner's own urine or saliva to form a potent draught. Specific incantations, often whispered or chanted, would accompany each step of the preparation, imbuing the potion with magical intent. The final potion was then secretly administered to the target, usually in food or drink, often disguised by strong flavors like honey, spices, or strong wine. The moment of administration was critical, requiring stealth and an understanding of the target's habits. The risks associated with these compelling potions were monumental. First and foremost, many of the ingredients were genuinely toxic, and accidental poisoning was a constant threat, not just for the target but potentially for the practitioner if they misjudged dosages or methods. Historically, many purported love potions likely resulted in severe illness, delirium, or even death, leading to accusations of murder rather than mere sorcery. From a societal perspective, using such potions was a grave offense, a direct violation of a person's free will and autonomy, often equated with black magic and punishable by harsh legal penalties, including execution. Church condemned them as acts of witchcraft, demonic influence, and a perversion of natural affection. For the practitioner, the fear of karmic retribution was real. It was believed that the charm could backfire, leading to a torturous, unrequited love, madness, or a grim twist of fate where the practitioner suffered the very ill effects intended for the beloved. A chilling tale from a medieval English collection of local legends describes a woman who, having brewed a potent love potion for a resistant suitor, accidentally consumed a small portion herself, leading her to waste away in a consuming unfulfilled longing, a tragic illustration of the feared consequences. Despite the profound dangers, the moral repugnance, and the sheer creepiness of their ingredients, compelling potions remained a desperate recourse for those seeking to control the hearts of others. They represented the ultimate violation of personal boundaries, a literal internal takeover, born of a deep yearning for love, or what was perceived as love, in a world where affections were often dictated by circumstance and desperate measures were sometimes the only perceived path to desire. The dark recesses of medieval human desire, indeed, harbored truly unsettling methods.